And so I will interrupt because we are hitting the top of the hour. So welcome, folks. My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United in Learning program for the General Council office, and I'm also a minister in a local church in Toronto. So I wear two hats and bring both sets of questions into these webinars. It's a delight to be connecting with you again, and Happy New Year to you, whether you're joining me here in Zoom, whether you're watching over at YouTube. I am watching the chat in both places, so I will do my best to gather and curate the questions and pose them at the appropriate time. Please use the chat for all of your questions, whether you're in Zoom or whether you're over at YouTube. Use the chat so that we're not interrupting each other. I've just muted everybody's mic, so presenters, you'll have to open your mic again when your turn comes along. But using a new feature, or new to us tonight in Zoom, and that is the live transcription or the closed captioning that you can see at the bottom of your screen. If you're in Zoom and indicating, you can turn it off. If you're on YouTube, unfortunately, you just have to put up with it. I see it's going over there. But if you're on Zoom and you'd like to turn it off, move your mouse over top of the screen so that all the icons come up at the bottom of the screen. And then down at the bottom right corner, you see three little dots and the word more. And click on that, and hidden in the more menu is the option to hide the subtitles. So if you're finding them a problem or distracting, you can turn them off. For people who are having difficulty hearing, or maybe have an internet connection that is sometimes dropping out, it's useful to have them. So we put them there as an option for you. Without further ado, I think I'll turn things over to Eric. So Eric, welcome back. Happy New Year. Good to have you with us.
Okay, and Happy New Year to everyone. And as I have a standard line I put on my emails, I hope you and yours everywhere are as well as can be through all this COVID craziness. Who could have ever imagined that we'd be coming up on 2 years of this? However, those regulars will recognize some familiarity here. I am trying to advance my screen. Let's see if it does. Okay, so we always kick off with the creed and how our work is so much about being called to be church and serving others. I don't go through the whole creed, but this for me has always been the church's mission statement. And before I talk about the agenda too, I just want to again take a moment for a land acknowledgement. This one is of course from Toronto, downtown Toronto, but perhaps you could take a moment to reflect on your locale, or even share that with us in the chat box. But we in Toronto acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, and we thank all the generations of people who've taken care of this land for thousands of years. This recognition must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So with that, here's what we plan to cover tonight based on the feedback we've heard and things that have been going on. There are still federal government announcements this week and last. Seasonally, we're going to share, I don't know, about 10 or 12 slides on the annual charitable return, the T3010, but also posted will be a 55 slide deck, line by line walkthrough. And we've chosen to do that instead of a separate webinar, just because we bump into scheduling challenges here. We may well record a webinar as well for that, Clyde and I, but right now you've got a full deck that'll be online tomorrow morning with the recording and with the slides from tonight. We'll be talking about statistics and assessments, implications of statistics. That's a Q1 task for any of you new treasurers. Andy Spears, and I say that, Steve, just so you have him queued up as a speaker, will be reporting back a little bit on some work that he's done on credit card access. That is getting credit cards for congregations that are hassled by the traditional banking system in getting one. Insurance is still a pain, but I'll give you the latest news. We'll have an update from the payroll team as well on a number of the actions that they are taking to improve service and work with ADP. And then there's a number of miscellaneous questions that have been submitted, and I include answers there in point form. Quickly though, our commercial, we do this work. Lots of us love it. I certainly find it very rewarding to help problem solve with people across the country and actually get a result. But we do this for what the mission or work or the ministry of the church across the world, across the country. And you know, it's that generosity that makes us the United Church. So thank you for supporting us. And since it's January, please get those last transfers in so we can see where we ended up. Okay, so the latest federal announcements. I reported last time that the queues and the CERB and all that would not be extended beyond October 23rd. However, there's a new program, the Canada Recovering Hiring Program, which is now looks to be extended to May. It won't apply to most of us. You need to have a significant increase in salary from what was reported in period 14. I know that sounds technical, but for those, you know, we've been hopefully checking our math every month. And I can tell you that Clyde mentioned in our warm up here that he's filed and gotten one back. And Ray Marshall in Niagara Falls has a couple submissions in. The amounts aren't huge. These are way scaled back big time from what we saw in the last year, but it's still something. So for most of us, they don't apply, but you still have to do the math to know that. Again, the deadline for those wage subsidy claims is 6 months after, and Clyde told me today, I haven't looked in a while myself, but Clyde told me that tomorrow is the deadline for period 18. So one big announcement for those of you who remember, we went to a lot of lobbying and arm twisting and maybe even begging to have the loan program, the federal loan program, opened up to churches, and quite a number of you have got that loan either in $40,000 or $60,000 increments. The government just announced that the interest-free period for those loans is now extended to December 31st, 2023. That's a one-year extension from what it was. So that's good news. It means even for cash flow and so on, you have that extra cushion if you need it. No interest before January 24, 2024. These terms happen to be the Royal Bank, but I'm guessing it might apply to everybody. 5% interest after that, and the full loans must be paid by the end of 2025. So anyway, good news, and probably again recognizing that this thing's lasting a lot longer than we ever thought. To make it easier for me to remember, and as a service to folks who have taken advantage of the United Church COVID loan program, we've decided to extend the interest-free period to align with the federal one. And want to stress that new loans are available through this year, because the whole idea originally was that the federal programs might last a little while, and it might take a little while to come out of COVID too, reopening, and that's sure been true. So anyway, just to say that program is available, the application is online. at the National Church website, and there's an expedited approval process at each of your regional councils. So the two loan programs now interest-free till December 2023. I want to say the one difference is that if you pay off a CEBA loan, you're done. You can't reopen it. You can't access it again. On the church side, we'll allow people to, reapply if they felt that they, paid it off too soon or run into trouble, but you only get one rebate. I think that's fair. Okay, so now here's a program that existed, but I didn't pay any attention to a couple of months ago because the revenue thresholds were so high. So the hardest hit business recovery program basically said that you needed to have a 50% drop in revenue, and from your 12-month average, and again for your claim period and stuff. For most of us, that isn't what happened. However, just announced for the next couple of periods, that would be period 24, 25, December through February, the government has reduced those thresholds to 25%. And if you were subject to either closed entirely or subject to a capacity limiting health restriction of 50%, you qualify. And I can't speak for every province, but that certainly describes what the situation has been in several provinces. So this is a possibility for these two time periods, and again, worth doing the calculation. Okay, on top of that, Ontario has announced a program that explicitly includes places of worship. You'll recall in a number of provinces that hasn't been the case, or there have been exclusions and so on. But here's one where if you've been reduced capacity to 50%, which again is us recently, there's a rebate possibility related to any lease costs or energy costs. So all of us will have, this is one of the coldest winters I can remember. If nothing else, there's a possibility there for energy costs. And the payment, the eligibility program is December 19th onwards, and the details are at this webpage link that is provided here. And I've talked to a number of treasurers in Ontario who've gotten their application in already for this. Now, the Ontario program specifically includes places of worship. In one of the calculations, they ask you to correlate building square footage for energy use. And I think we can fairly say you use the entire building. The one question was, should we only be talking about the sanctuary? But as a practical matter, the whole building's been under restriction. And another question was, are you considered closed if you're doing online? And certainly that's not true for retail stores, and therefore I'm suggesting that it not be true for churches either. And you should feel comfortable applying for this program. Now, I'm not looking at the chat box, but I'm not aware right now. I do browse, I do get notices of what's going on across the country, but I have not seen notices that describe grant programs right now that relate to other provinces. But if there is any news, please include that in the chat box. And Steve, maybe you can flag that for me as I'm going along.
Sure, haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, since we're at year end, this is an old slide, but or a reused slide anyway, but for 2021, most of the grants that you would have gotten would apply to 2021 now. You already did your 2020 accounting. So most of it's going to be in 2021. I've had several questions asking about the famous CEBA accounting, where you're supposed to account for the grant, even though you haven't gotten it and won't get it until 2023. So we call that the goofy accounting. But if you got a CEBA loan this year for $60,000, you should be taking $20,000 into income in 2021. Again, there's some information here on specific lines that you would report certain things, but just to, there a reminder for the accounting. T3010, which we're about to talk about, of course, is back to the 6-month deadline, June. I would suggest that most treasurers try to get it out of the way as early as possible. I always say March, but don't always do that myself. But don't give yourself a deadline pinch, because things can happen, and you don't want to inadvertently lose charitable status. So quickly, any questions before I turn it over to Clyde for a bit?
Nothing really substantive here, Eric. One person acknowledging that you said that the CEBA loan interest-free period has been extended. Are we to expect any written confirmation from CRA on that, or is the news releases that we've been getting and the word from you something we can just rely on without?
Yeah, I think the individual banks might communicate something, but I would not hold your breath. Long-time participants in this program will know that communication these days has been by web update. And there was a time where before these calls, I would have to reread that stuff just to see if something changed, or have Clyde tell me, because if anybody tells you, it'll be your bank, and probably not.
Thank you. Somebody at YouTube is asking, can I apply for the Ontario energy rebate as a treasurer, or does this need to be done by the trustees?
I don't think Ontario will care. It provincially, the CRA federally will at least looks to see if it's an authorized person. Ontario won't even know. So the only thing you should do is make sure that your congregation doesn't have any philosophical objections to any of these, like taking government money or whatever. But generally, if your revenues are down as a treasurer, you should be going for it.
Thank you. 4-point charge. Does each church apply for the Ontario credit separately?
That's interesting. Go for it. I think the test will be what identifier they might use, but I've just switched the screen there. I think there's a good chance that they would be eligible, because there isn't the normal hook. Each of those points, particularly if they have their own charitable status, then I believe there's no doubt whatsoever. And even if they don't, they are important points in their own community. So the worst that could happen is for the government to say no.
Well, they each have their own heating bills, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. That's all I'm seeing at this point.
Okay. So Clyde, I'm going to turn it over to the long-haired one. And again, just a reminder, we have a 55 slide deck on this that will be available online. I think we've set it up so it prints a few slides to a page, which takes you through the entire deck, but we're going to touch on a few highlights here. So Clyde.
I'm going to stay to less than 55 slides tonight. I might stay to about 54. Do you think that's reasonable?
No.
We're going to talk T3010, and it's one that everybody's looking at these days. That is after you've already done your statistics form. Statistics deadline is in February. I think it's March 7th officially. And we want to have that done, and then you get your T3010 and you'll have them all done by the 10th of March. I think that works great. I don't get mine done that quick. Anyway, if you're filing your return online, you can access the T3010 form in a PDF format, a fillable PDF format. You can do it either directly online or you can do it through the PDF fillable form and then upload it through your My Business account. And either way, it's got to be there before the end of June for most of us. If you're filing a paper return, all the instructions are there for both of them. You've got to make sure you include your financial statements. And one of the things that I've come across in the last couple of weeks, questions about, make sure that you're doing a compilation of the finances of all the groups related to the church. You should have one financial statement that includes your UCW, your men's group, your choir, all of that. And if you don't have it done in your own books, that's fine, but make sure you account for them on the T3010 form. They're looking to see how much money is under the control of the charity. And all of that, all those funds are under the control of the charity. So let's move ahead a little bit here. Before you get started on it, make sure you've got yourself organized. You'll see a spreadsheet in a couple of minutes that might help and explain some of what we do with the different groups that are within the church, but make sure you've got all your financial data. If your chart of accounts is set reasonable, it will already be broken down into a format that fits fairly easy into the reporting purposes, or you should know what accounts you group together to report. The different parts of it have to have an allocation, and we'll speak to that when we get into another slide a little further. So we can go one more slide there, Eric. And this is the way I look at compiling all of them together. Now, it just says asset, liability, revenue, and expenses, but each one of those has many accounts under it. But I still group them all by as close to those account numbers, account setup, as I can, so that I can just use the total when filling out the T3010 form. Spreadsheets are great for doing this, and you can set them up in a way that you can tie your account numbers or account names to it and be able to use the spreadsheet year after year, unless you reorganize like I did with a couple of them this year. Moving ahead, getting organized, splitting the expenses. You can see in, I think it's around line 5,000,
Yeah.
5,800, somewhere in that ballpark. You're asked about your management and administration and your fundraising costs. Don't worry in the fundraising costs about the small little things, the craft shows and that sort. What they're looking for under fundraising is if you're doing a major fundraising and you've possibly hired, you might be running it yourself, but you're looking at accumulating a lot of dollars. And so that's where they're looking at what's it cost you to do this. The other, the small things, you put your net amount on line 4630, and that reports your actual fundraising net amount. So we'll move on from there to categorizing. Management and administration includes many things, or you can do what I was advised to do many years ago, and that is work out what an approximate percentage is, because it's hard to know how much of the bookkeeping is actually management and administration versus working for one of the charitable programs and tracking the dollars and cents for that program. And so if you work a percentage on it and make it reasonable in around the 15 to 20, 25% tops, I've never seen anybody argue with it. They just want to know. No longer do we need to put in our political costs. So what I do on the spreadsheet is I pull out the management admin, the fundraising, the political, subtract those from the total that's up on line 4990, I believe it is, and the balance is on 5,000. So this is approximate. Nobody tries to balance it up against anything else. It's giving them a feel for this is all put up on the web, and there are some places, and there's one legal firm here in Toronto that pulls all this information off the web for all the charities, and they then start comparing what's management and administration compared to fundraising, compared to the actual charitable programs. So it's more statistical type information than it is to have right down to the dollar.
Yeah, and Clyde, if I may, this relates to the financial dollars too, not volunteer time. So
That's
if you have, if you have a small church, that 4-point charge that asked the question earlier, it's very possible your charitable activity could be in the 90s because a lot of your stuff is volunteer, and even building costs, like maintaining your church building, is part of furtherance of religion. Unlike a situation where if you were delivering meals on wheels or something, where your building would be your office type thing. So just to say that for smaller places, you could pick a number like 90 or 93 and assign a smaller amount to management and admin, and you'd be done.
Yeah, and one of the things, you obviously have a higher admin figure if you're doing a lot of rentals of your building, even though the rental is into the charity activity, but the rentals do cost a lot of administration time. So weigh the things out and do your best guess at it. That's all I would recommend on that point. We move ahead in question A1, a question that's popular almost every year. I get many calls on it. We are subordinate under the United Church Manual to the United Church of Canada. And so you have to answer A1 with a yes, and then add in United Church of Canada and use the charitable number that is shown here. And I have seen them go through with RR 0001 because people do use that tail out of habit. It's not very often you see a 2 or a 3, but this is a number that's been around for a few years and consolidated with others, and that's why it ends up with a 3 on it. Make sure you use the right number. Termination, winding up or dissolved or terminated. Not many of us are doing that on a regular basis. There's a lot more to it than just answering a yes on this question. So be aware that there's something more to happen, and we're definitely not public or private foundations.
Yeah, and Clyde, for question A2, if you are closing or at least planning it, you don't tell the CRA right away. And I'm not suggesting hiding anything, but it's actually, you trigger all kinds of work for yourself. If they see a yes there, they invoke a procedure where they start taking away your charitable number, and your trustees might still be working on selling a building, or you might still be, and it throws off all kinds of work. So my advice is, don't answer that question yes until you've already dealt with your assets.
Get your assets down to 0.
That's it.
Then tell the CRA, write them a letter and say you want a voluntary revocation, and that'll trigger it, and everything else is easy after that from the financial side of things. The directors and trustees and like officials, this is a form that causes a lot of concern, and it's concerned mainly because of the information that's on there that we create ourselves. The information, every bit of it is mandatory, including birth dates. The part that does not need to be filled out every time is if the person is continuing in the office, do not put an end date. because putting an end date on there removes them from the ability to be able to talk to the CRA. And a lot of churches over the past couple of years have come to a point where there was no names on the list because they put end dates on their form. Just because you have an election and re-elect at the beginning of the year doesn't mean they end on December 31, as far as this form is concerned.
And you majorly shoot yourself in the foot if you have no directors. A lot of people on this call actually know that and live this already. Our help desk has literally helped dozens and dozens of people with this. So something to watch out for.
And we move on into the gifts, the other form that we have to fill out along with the T3010, the T1236, qualified donees. This is if you're giving money to another registered charity or some of the other ones here, like the different athletic associations and things of that type. When you make that kind of a donation, make sure that the donation is going to a qualified donee. I just recently, I had my own church wanting me to write a check to a person, and I said, no, we have to give it to a qualified donee. Now, that's not for expense reimbursement. This was a donation that our outreach people wanted to do. And we have to make sure that what we're doing falls within the proper bailiwick for being reported. When you come down to it, all of the charities you're giving to, or very few of them, I should say, are associated charities. Do not even tick that box for the United Church of Canada, despite the fact in question A1 or A2, we put in that we were subject to them. Consider yourself a separate charity because you have your own charity number. And we move on into some of the other activities and things outside of Canada. This gets to be very tricky when you start sending money offshore, and offshore even includes the United States, because you can only give to a qualified donee, which is a registered charity or athletic association in Canada. So make sure you've got the proper things in place to be able to send it out. In most cases, work through a charity that deals with it, or a qualified donee that deals with it the way you want to see your program work. And it saves doing up a lot of contracts and things to make sure that it's a program of your church.
And Clyde, I'll mention, you should, for most people, the answer to this question is no, and you move on. If you are supporting a school in Kenya, as my church did once, or you have an ongoing relationship with an organization directly, it's important that you have written agreements and various ways to demonstrate direction and control. I won't name the church, but I worked with a church recently that had a penalty of tens of thousands of dollars arising from the fact that they'd been supporting this outfit for years and years and years. But when the CRA came to look at it, they couldn't say they had direction and control. So if you are doing something direct, feel free to check with me, if you're at all concerned about that.
I'm aware of another church that was helping a school offshore, and they thought they had control because it was the son of one of their members who they were sending the money to. But just because he's a son doesn't mean that he's a qualified donee. And fortunately, they did not get caught on it, but they did clean it up and try and improve things before they closed. Anyway, moving ahead, Section D, if you can get away with it with your amount of money that you bring in, your revenue stream is low enough That's a very easy form to fill out. So we're going to deal a lot with sections, Schedule 6. And going into Schedule 6, this is where if you have your account set up or you've got a spreadsheet to be able to work with and move, consolidate everything, this is where you do one reporting for all of the groups within the church. And you work with that and make sure that you have your method ahead of time as to how you're going to allocate expenses. As was said earlier, smaller the congregation, the larger amount of your percentage-wise goes to charitable activity, but the other two could be involved in there, so be aware of it. And this is just where the lines are on the Schedule 6. They're down near the bottom, but one of the other things that comes out, it doesn't happen when you do an online filling, but remember to put your totals in at the bottom of each section. Even I don't believe the fillable form even has the total box calculated. I think you have to actually put the numbers in. And if you forget that, I've seen the reform returned. And if you don't have enough time to turn it around before June 30th, it's called late. So make sure all the boxes are filled in. This gives you a list of all the different places that are considered to be qualified donees. And if you do happen to throw some money at a group outside of this list for the year, included under your activities of church programming, find a way to include it there. It's not worth going back and doing a lot of hassle in the first 6 months of the next year because nobody's going to remember the donation was made anyway. So,
and again, I'll working with a congregation right now that wanted desperately to flow some money to a very worthy cause in their community that wasn't a qualified donee. And right now the CR, and then, well, they've actually closed, but now the CRA is chasing them and absolutely insisting on over $200,000. So again, this is serious stuff. Anytime you see like a CRA actually checks on something.
Yeah, it's small dollars, or it might be small dollars in the long run, but it totals up because they go back a number of years to look at what your track record is on these donations, and they come up with figures, and if you can't prove it otherwise, you're stuck. Anyway, some tips and reminders. I'm not going to mention all of them. We've talked about them. File early. Make sure your business account is current. In October, they started a new way of authorizing representatives on your account. As long as somebody's on the business account directly, you can do it online after the form is filled out. You can send that through the system and approve it right there, where it used to be they would try and phone you and people would hang up because it's CRA calling. So they've changed it now so that you can do it, go in online. I had one just the 1st of November where it was the turnaround from the time the form was signed. I submitted it. They went online. It was done in 48 hours. We were done. So it's worth it to try and follow the pattern. And make sure your tax receipts, we have not mentioned them, but you report the numbers on here. Make sure the numbers that you report on the T3010 Schedule 6 is within dollars of your total tax receipts issued, because they do look at that. Now, they don't get the totals, but if they start seeing some large ones come through, they're going to start looking at them. And just be aware that on occasion, they do try and catch you on it. And they can come out and ask you for prove the dollar value you say that you put on there. So, and then again, the same as we started out, file on time. It'll save a lot of headaches because nobody wants to be deregistered.
Yeah, it's unprofessional for me to have been doing this, but back when I gave live workshops, I used to say, file on time. It's more important that it be on time than it be accurate. But we actually want both. So with that, Steve, anything in the chat box?
Yeah, there are a
is-
bunch of questions this time. A lot of them are kind of specific to some of the things you've been talking about, and there's a few of them that are repeats. So let me pick up the repeats first. You've already acknowledged that mission and service donations are payments to a qualified donee. There's an assumption going on here that denominational assessments are not. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would be reported. The line number isn't in my head this instant, but they are dues or membership dues is the category of activity.
Yeah, membership is what it is on Schedule 6. I'll have the line here in a minute.
Keep going, Steve.
Several people talking about the list of directors and officers, and frustration that this has to be retyped every year. Somebody was suggesting you can just cut and paste from last year's PDF. They don't keep this on file, Clyde. It does have to be cut and pasted from somewhere. Is that correct?
It does have to be redone right now, but I have, in talking with some of the people in the Charities Directorate, I've had a number of long conversations there. This is on their to-do list. It won't happen for this year's go-round. It may not even be for 22. But they have got it on the list to try and pull in the fields that are reasonable for the next one. What they're concerned with is that if they pre-fill in a field, it won't be looked at.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If I may, it may save you some work. It may not. But what I've always done is type my names and data in the order of, like, if you have 3-year terms or something, group them together so that you might be able to reuse an entire page. You don't have to retype them. You can just delete. If there's if there's one that comes off it, you can delete that one and replace it with somebody else. So, I reuse the same T1235 routinely to try to save keystrokes. But the biggest challenge, frankly, has been the number of people that technically should go on it. With our committee sizes and our trustees, but report at least your core governing board and trustees.
And Barbara's acknowledging that when she was filling in using Chrome remembered and gave her those options to fill in. So there you go. Sometimes Google is watching and we appreciate it. So you had talked about not filling in an end date for these trustees. There's a couple of places where you would. Isn't that correct? One is if the person dies, and another if the person resigns. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So end date only if the person's really has ended.
That's right. It's not necessarily December 31. It's the month or date when if you've got the exact date when they did resign.
Right. Thank you. Here's an interesting one from YouTube. Our minister retired in 2021, replaced by a student minister. So who becomes the director, the student minister or the supervising minister who's supervising the student?
I'm going to say I don't know, because that's more of a polity question, or it might even vary by region. So I can chase that down for folks. But
personally, I would say put them both on.
Yeah, that's the worst that could happen.
Sure.
Yeah, put them both on, because at one point somebody's going to drop off of it, if not both of them at the same time, and you just put an end date on the next year.
Okay, thank you. Here's a couple of questions about income from right at the beginning of your presentation there, Clyde. If we don't have an AGM to approve the financial statement, should it be included with our T3010?
It has to be included, and your board has the authority to be able to approve your financial statements and your budget the same up until June of 2022, I think they have.
Yeah.
Under the current manual adjustments that were made by the General Council Executive.
Thank you. And so you had said you wanted all income from all different branches of the church Somebody's asking, is it enough to report UCW Inquire income in a note to the financial statement, but not in the total income and expenses?
What I do is I get a financial statement from each of the organizations. And it can be very simple, but I want to seek, UCW, for instance, gives away a lot of money. I want to make sure that that's going to charities, and it has to be reported on the 1236.
Yep.
So you've got to have that information in a type of financial statement. Then I just append those to the back of my statements.
Thank you. So another quick question. This is about reporting fundraising, monies raised and costs. Somebody had a fundraising concert. They paid out $1,400 to their performers. Total profit only ended up being $920. Where do those numbers get reported?
Okay, the 1,400 or the 920? The 920, was that the total revenue or the profit?
It does not clear.
Okay.
I'm assuming it's net profit, but it's not clear in the question.
Okay, if they took in for 900 and spent 1,400, you've got a negative number under fundraising on line. 1 second here. I think it's 4610. No, it's on 4630. And if you've got a profit, like if they only spent 900 but they took in 1,400, the $500 gets added to 4630.
Okay. So
It's
you put in your net profit as the funds raised.
That's right. The
After
line
expenses.
asks for total non-tax receipted revenue from fundraising.
Okay.
And you can include expenses for fundraising down further if you want to do it separately, but net will work in the same way.
Good, thank you. Here's an interesting one. You had said that we need to list ourselves as charities that are subordinate to the United Church of Canada. What about ecumenical shared ministries?
That's back to you, Eric.
No, it's not to me either, but here it depends who the charity is. So in most ecumenical settings, they could well be maintaining their separate charitable status, and they have their own sets of numbers, and that's what they should report.
And I can say I just managed a webinar for judicatories in ecumenical shared ministries yesterday, and they're all different.
Yep.
But every one of them has an agreement that will lay out those kinds of things, and that is one of the things that, if it isn't clear in your agreement, you need to get clear in your agreement how this works. But every one of them is different, and they've evolved over time in different directions. And talk with the regional council staff and the bishop and sort out how this works. But there is not one size fits all solution to that one.
But I think
that's hot off the press from yesterday's webinar.
Yeah, I think Eric's comment is good, though. Who does this charity number you're reporting under belong to?
Yep.
And that's what needs to be worked on.
So if there's one charitable, then you combine all, the revenues and expenses and assets. If there's multiple, you need to split it out. That's basically it.
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions about gifts to persons, gifts to or payments to a refugee, that kind of stuff. Do we have to account for payments to persons when it's part of a refugee sponsorship project, or when it's food or personal care items or clothing, that kind of thing? Are those qualified donees? How's that dealt with?
No, that's programming, as long as it's a formal refugee sponsorship. You can't, or the only ways you can give money to an individual, refugee sponsorship is the exception, and benevolent programs for food cards and minor amounts. Otherwise, you can't give money to an individual.
Okay, thank you. Last question here.
The important part there is minor amounts. I've seen them question where it got over $1,000 to an individual.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And they would ideally love to see no payment. And I'm not talking about refugees now, but for benevolent programs, I've actually had a CRA adjudicator tells me that they don't want any money, and this is stupid. You can get lots of different answers from different people. But the idea was that pay a rent bill or pay a hydro bill or give out food cards or something.
Yeah, that's what I do. I buy gift cards and then give those out. So yeah.
And I've
Okay.
read,
And
I've
last
written many
question.
rent checks, so.
Sure. Last question, and I'm not sure if I completely understand it, but I'll read it as written. Do individual churches enter land and buildings in line 4155? And if so, how is this determined? I don't know whether that means individual churches within a multi-point charge or what the context of the question is, John.
Yep.
But
Clyde?
I think
Both
that's just
answers.
that's just a, doesn't matter whether you're in a single point charge or a multi-point charge. It's how much you're holding in lands and buildings, because they're looking at what your total dollar value is. Most of us do not report that on our financial statements. So what I've done is, if it's not reported on the financial statements, I still put a figure in there, but I use the figure that is used on the statistical form for insurance purposes. And it gives us a ballpark number.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the questions I've seen. So let's carry on with the next section. Thanks, friends.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Okay, just a reminder that everyone on this call, if you're a treasurer, you should have your Church Hub account, because I'm going to be talking about information that resides on it. And if you don't have one, how to get one, you'll be reaching out to Susan Jackson. But this is the way, of the future, the same way with the CRA, the same way with us internally. And Clyde mentioned this already. Statistics, our church statistics are a chore. I have to say that as a church treasurer myself, it's the thing I hated the most, because I had to chase down so many different people, and I'm used to getting things done faster than some other people. But it is what it is. The sooner we can get these statistics, the better, in terms of all kinds of things, but even knowing what the overall impact of year 2 of COVID has been. I've reported back to you what year 1 was, and that informs all kinds of decisions and our availability of programs. We've established these, I call them target deadlines, because who in the United Church always meets a deadline? But Susan Jackson would be delighted if single point charges could have their data in by March 7th and multi-points by March 21st. But if it's later than that, as soon as possible, please. And it informs all kinds of different actions. For yourselves, though, it will immediately, if you're filing online, that the day you file, you'll already know your 2023 assessment too. You'll get a statement produced for that. So already for your planning now, that's a firm number going forward that will be very, very helpful to you. The blue forms have been mailed to everybody in early January. I think it was the 7th or something. So everybody should have those. I would hope that you look at them in a bemused fashion as an old ancient thing, and don't do anything more with them, or maybe even scribble on them or put your coffee on them as you're doing your online filing of statistics, which of course you can do through Church Hub. More than half our congregations across the country do file online, and we need to get that higher. The online forms, Susan confirmed, are available as of today on Church Hub. Okay, as I said, as soon as you submit your 2021 stats, you'll know what the target assessment is for 2023 for planning purposes and so on. Those of you who are looking at perhaps huge increases in assessment based on having a consistent formula across the country, revenues have come down, so has the assessment because of that. And so literally to the tune of 10, 20, 30%. So it could be that an increase that you were worried about for 2022 or 2023 suddenly might even be a decrease. The first payment is due for all modes is February 1st. That your statements, your invoice is online. Obviously, we're hoping that over time we can get everyone on some form of electronic mode. Checks cost a lot to issue. They cost for you. They cost a lot to receive. And any church resources that we can have flow in an automated fashion means that there's more resource for the real ministry of the church. So getting there, there's the annual assessment tile within your Church Hub account. You go to reports on the drop-down menu. There's a target assessment tab. And here's the quirky thing. We'll maybe try to improve on this. We're used to thinking about statistics year. So statistics year 2021 is assessment year 2023, because we've just as soon as we get your 21 stats, that's when we can calculate a 2023 number. Again, when it's there, if you file online, it's there immediately. If you file on paper, we'll have to receive it. We'll have to find time to data enter it and check it. So it'll be some time before it's available if you're still in snail mail mode. And again, the assessment invoice is there in the same fashion. And there's what the tabs look like. Okay, so again, we've updated for the 2022 formula, and there's a transition for those facing increases. We hope to be fully at every congregation across the country, every community of faith, participating in the same consistent, transparent manner for January 2023. But we do have 1 year of transition still for folks who might still be looking at increases, and that's all explained here at this site. Quick plug for capital assistance programs is just intended to be a reference. If you've got if you're a smaller congregation, with revenues less than $150,000, there's $5,000 grants to help with some repairs. There's loans. Loans, though, are available to all congregations. We try to be a friendly lender when banks maybe aren't. And of course, we've had some very encouraging participation in folks greening their buildings. And the Faithful Footprints grants can be larger. They can be $20,000, or in terms of transformative projects, even $30,000. I mentioned the United Church loans earlier. Expedited region approvals, the interest-free date to December 31. And again, here's the web link. So you can find it on the church website. And I just checked it a couple of hours ago, so it's all current. So questions on any of that?
Okay, a few, and again, they're kind of detailed questions. Susan Jackson's answering a couple of them in the chat, but I will ask them publicly here so that people on YouTube hear the answers too. Okay, so getting a market value for your building, how do you do that? Do you talk to a real estate agent? Do you talk to your insurance person? What's the best way to get the market value for the church building?
Yeah, and I'm going to just make a point here that's where I would have answered differently from Clyde, and this isn't to hang anybody out there. He answers better than I do most of the time. I don't like insurance replacement value because it's often 4 or 5 or 10 times what you can actually get for it. So I'm a fan of even guesstimating a number, and it could be a matter of, if you have a real estate agent in your congregation or something, just asking them what the land or a special use building might go for.
Okay, thank you. New rules on assessment for investments has changed the numbers that somebody's seeing at Church Hub for their church. And then ended up, the new assessment numbers historically are listed there as bigger than they'd actually paid. Will that extra amount ever be due?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but the amount that you're being billed currently, like if you were on the freeze program, where you were paying an intentional lower amount for a time, there will never be a claim for those past amounts. Any past amounts will be unpaid at the time they were in force. And that's a relatively modest amount.
Okay. I may have not summarized the question clearly, but there was a change in how investments were being assessed.
Yes. Okay. I've covered that in previous webinars, but just to say, we used to ask you for realized and unrealized gains,
Yes.
investment income. And that was an issue for people, and the numbers jumped around. In 2018, it could have been 0. In 2019, it could have been double-digit returns. In fact, the last few years. So in October, the General Counsel approved a recommendation that I developed through our finance committee and working with people like Andy, actually, to go with an assessment that approximated what investments would earn long-term, but would be based on 1/4 of 1% of the long-term investment balance at the end of the year.
Yeah, and so the question is, now that that's in place, their 2018, 2019, 2020 numbers in Church Hub have all been adjusted, and they're showing higher than they actually ended up paying. Are they going to have to pay that adjusted amount for historic years?
Categorically, no.
Thank
You would only be, the only amounts that you would ever be asked for in arrears are ones that you were billed for in those years. And this actually sounds like a system glitch that I'm unaware of.
Okay, thank you. If we're on pre-authorized quarterly payments for 2021, will those automatically continue in 2022, or do we have to restart that?
Yes, they will automatically continue with the adjusted amount. And this is why I love it for everybody. You just account for it. I receive it electronically. My folks can process it in nanoseconds as opposed to hours.
So, okay, next question. What if we screw up when we're entering our statistics, discover the mistake and have to amend them? How does those changes work through the system? Will the assessment be adjusted too?
Yeah, you talk to, I'll have the email at the end. It'll ultimately be Susan Jackson, but we do have an inbox, statistics@unitedchurch.ca. And this happens every year. There are clarifications, but again, this is the value of knowing right away. If you file online, you get your statement and it looks nutty, you've got 8 months to help fix it.
Great. How do you switch from annual payments to quarterly payments?
You tell us, you tell us. You don't ask us, you tell us.
Okay. Eliminating checks. How do you get around the double authorized signature on checks?
We'll do more on that in future, but you could literally choose not to have 2 signatures, and we can talk about the controls that you would need to replace that. But the rules that we have had for decades no longer keep up with things like electronic banking and so on. So we are one way to do it is to go to 1 signature on the actual banking transaction, but have a review of bank statements, or 2 signatures to approve a transaction before it goes to be input online. And Clyde and Andy, we'll talk about that more in future webinars.
Yeah, and indeed, Andy's been talking a little bit about the program he uses in the chat already. So just to tell everybody else that Andy will like
to
soon.
I'll take 2 seconds, and we'd happy to add it to a future webinar. There's a number of payment processors in Canada. The one that is the most effective for, I think, what most churches need is a firm called Pluto, Plooto, that will link with virtually any Canadian financial institution, and they're very sophisticated about. You can have 1, 2, 3, 5, an infinite number of digital signatures. You can set thresholds for under 500 needs 1 digital signature, or you all need multiple digital signatures. It links tightly into most bookkeeping systems. So our bookkeeper simply creates the payments in QuickBooks, pushes them to Pluto. Pluto sends an email to all of the designated signatories saying there's stuff for you to authorize. All of the paperwork attached to the payment is digitally available, and then you can authorize it digitally. Happy to talk about it in a future seminar in more detail. It's basically eliminated. We absolutely do not and will not issue checks, but we have very, very high levels of control and separation of duties in our organization.
Right. And if I may, part of our challenge here, Andy lives a couple of miles from his church, so he doesn't want to have to walk over there to sign checks every time. But for smaller places, we need to find the kinds of solutions that can work almost anywhere. And just delighted that Andy's aboard for this because he's an expert in the field. Okay, anything else?
Reminding me that credit unions often offer that service too. So if those of you working with a credit union might find that helpful. Eric, that's the end of the questions I've seen. So I think we should carry on.
Okay, we'll keep going. We've still got a ways to go, and we're turning it back over to Andy now. Just by way of introduction, I took a meeting with, it happened to be the Royal Bank, but it could have been any of them, and basically said, how do I get my congregations to have a credit card if they want one without being hassled for GICs, without being hassled for this, without all kinds of proofy stuff. Hey, they're going to pay their account every month. Now, I was going out on a limb there, but nonetheless, in short, the traditional banks, and I think Andy said this last time, are too bureaucratic and don't have the flexibility that new entrants seem to have. So Andy's going to share with us some findings, and if there's interest, I think there's a good chance we could cut a national deal where any congregation that wanted to have a credit card in their name to facilitate online ordering and various other things, that we could probably do that. I'm careful about over-promising there. We still need to gauge interest, but over to Andy.
Andy, you're muted.
Andy, you're muted.
Andy, you're muted. Can you open your mic, please?
Sorry.
There we go.
There are, fortunately in Canada, starting to be some financial technology providers who are stepping in to provide more innovative services than either the credit unions or the big five. And this is true, particularly we now see in Canada. It's been true in the United States for a long time. But providers who are focusing on small businesses and their payments processes and their both money going out and money going in. And there are two in Canada that focus on providing a fairly robust credit card process. And the one that we have chosen for Bloor Street, at any rate, is a private equity-backed firm called Carry. It's a Canadian fintech. They offer a MasterCard. The thing that Carry does, and we have to sort this out if we decide to look at rolling it out nationally, is unlike most banks for these sorts of circumstances, they don't require a big chunk of dough on deposit. They don't require you put up a GIC or do that sort of thing. They do monitor your bank balance, and they monitor a 6-month rolling average of the bank balance. The other thing that's very important, unlike lots of cards, is if you choose to issue one for your minister or for your administrator or for your treasurer, there is no shared liability to that person. It is a corporate card. There is no credit bureau hit on that person, and the liability remains with the church itself, not with the individual. Now, some churches will have enough of cash in their own accounts to be able to manage being creditworthy. What Eric and I will do is have a conversation about how we would roll this out for smaller congregations using the United Church as background, or as the credit backer on it. Eric was initially concerned about whether or not this was too sophisticated or was able to offer a basic offering. And the thing that I think will be helpful for folks is there is a very basic offering, but some remarkable capabilities as well that I think will be helpful for folks. At a minimum, it's on the MasterCard network. There is an unlimited number, technically an unlimited number of cards you can issue on your account. The charge per card is zero. There's 150 basis points, 1.5% cash back, which is simply rolled over and applied to your next month's bill. It's a standard 21 days from billing date grace period. There is certainly interest if you allow your deposit or your balance to go unpaid, but there are no late fees, no incremental fees beyond the interest. And as with all sort of Canadian credit cards, at least on the major networks, there's zero fraud liability subject to you not sharing your PIN with somebody. The thing that is also particularly valuable in terms of making this flexible for managing payments for the church is that it allows whoever is administering the program for you to issue a limited number of virtual cards. They are issued, and you can constrain any single one of the cards that you issue. So that the example being that they issue, some of their clients are small construction companies, and they may issue to a foreman a card that can only be used at the suppliers. The way we anticipate using this sort of thing is we have various projects. So for example, we do a big alumni event for one of our projects, and a volunteer organizes it. We can issue to that person a virtual card that's good for 3 months, and then it is pulled back. So that you have huge flexibility rather than, oh, we have a card and we share it around, which actually creates all sorts of security violations. There are, for your record keeping, again, depending on how sophisticated your capability is, you can require is, yes, when you have used the card or whoever you've authorized to use the card to make a purchase, they are also required to take a photograph of the receipt. And that will get uploaded as part of your file, which gives you better record keeping and better auditability. And importantly, for at least a congregation like ours, it ties directly into most of the online bookkeeping systems, QBO, Xero. And so again, the statement comes across, you can allocate it directly against your various GL accounts. So Bloor Street is now approved to be on the platform and to issue cards. We think it will be a huge benefit for our staff, for our volunteers. It will make sort of expense submission almost a thing of the past. It will make will give us much better control, and it's accessible without people putting up huge amounts of money, or frankly any. I don't know if you want to take questions about the program, Eric, or if we just want to sort of talk about our next steps.
Well, if you could, Andy, take us through your couple of slides, and then we'll see if there are any questions.
Okay, so the next,
even the basic features is what people have been asking for at this stage.
Pardon me?
Even the basic features are appealing to folks who right now are being told they can't have a card.
Right. So that I managed to sort of push all of that onto one slide. The next slide is simply what the next steps are from your and my perspective.
Okay.
So Bloor Street is on the program. The thing that we discovered is, and I don't know for how many congregations this is true. Bloor Street was started in 1886, so we're non-incorporated. And this causes all sorts of chaos for all sorts of organizations. Fortunately, the chief risk officer for Kerry, who is a banker, is a member of United Church. And so we were able to sort of sort through all of the idiosyncratic aspects of the United Church and who trustees were and who the board was and who the officers were and what the manual said. And so they are now at least familiar with doing all of that. They are very keen to enter into a larger program with the United Church. And so that will be a discussion over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, sir. And let me just say for anyone out there,
Also, I can see some of the questions.
Yeah.
No, you don't transfer funds to Kerry. That's the whole point. It's not a prepay. You pay it like any other credit card bill. How does Kerry make money with no fees? Don't forget that the thing about the credit card business is that they actually hose down the vendors. There's an interchange on every single transaction, which is a political debate that goes on, but that's actually how they make money. And certainly if you allow your funds, if you don't pay your balance on time, then there is the usual credit card interest rate. You can, by the way, just have I would encourage you all to Google CAARY, and you'll find lots of stuff there.
and if I can just say, Andy, Bloor Street's lucky to have Andy. I'm going to call him a banking geek. Not every church has one, but we're going to be able to benefit from his expertise on this, and he'll need to dumb it down for me and perhaps for others.
Oh dear, I apologize.
Not at all. Okay. Are there any other questions, or shall we keep moving? We're going a
Haven't
little.
seen any others. Carry on.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Those were the questions. A couple of other things we're going to do updates on. The whole insurance thing has been a very painful year. You've all had to, if you're, frankly, it doesn't matter what insurer you're with, but those of you on the national UCC Protect plan have all had to submit new applications or current applications for the first time in years. The underwriting has been stricter. That's part of the way the insurance world is. If your building's over 35 years, they're asking for a whole bunch of stuff. Appraisals, there's thermal imaging of our buildings when they come to inspect. There's all kinds of stuff happening. And here I've listed again for you some of the appraisal companies, if that's a factor in your insurance plan. Lots of delays. I mean, if you have a December renewal, you may not yet have your statement, and that's almost, I would say in most normal times that's unconscionable, but it's the way it is, and our premiums have been at least kept down. December is the last month of a quarterly, like a full year of doing this extra underwriting. So we're almost through this, what has been a complete pig. Coverage remains in force as the delay is the responsibility of the insurer, the broker. There has been communication on this, but it may or may not have come through a local broker or may have gone to the wrong person. Right now, it looks like we could be looking at increases again in March. Negotiations continue, but we don't have a lot of leverage here because the increases on the UCC Protect plan are actually less than we've seen in some of the other specialty insurers. It's just a very challenging time. Now, could we get together on self-insurance? I'd mentioned this before. We're evaluating, we've done it, we commissioned a study. We're debating the risk. If we were to do this as a church collectively, not just the folks that are already insured with through UCC Protect, but inviting others who aren't. The current modeling that we've done, we would offer an immediate 15% reduction from your current premium, foregoing the 15% increase that could be coming in March, that is coming in March, potentially limiting future increases to inflation, and also offering up the kind of coverage options that the major insurers don't want to do, like actual stated value amount. If you wouldn't replace your $5 million, 1,100 seat cathedral with something a quarter of the size. So there's ways to customize the insurance. Now, that's all very nice. That's very attractive, but it would entail a significant investment of capital by the national church. It would entail having to live with the fact that, if claims got out of hand for an extended period of time, and it would take out any local broker relationships. So this is under review. There'll be a go, no-go decision on this. What I told people is, let's just decide one way or the other. And we could implement it as early as June renewals, or we could decide not to do it because we don't like, we think the overall risk profile is too scary at this time. But it is a potential opportunity for all of us to be, again, in it together, ideally focus on, risk management best practices as opposed to having premiums skyrocketing the way they have. So that's the status report on where we're at. And that's my last insurance slide. Let me keep going. I'm looking at the time here.
There are comments, but not really questions in the chat. And, it sounds like people are appreciating you looking into the issues.
Yeah, well, certainly all of this has been, it's like everything else, the COVID, the insurance, I'll add payroll to that. But here's the payroll action plan. We had a lot of concern expressed last time. And frankly, there's been work happening over the last few years. But here are the immediate steps that either have been taken or are being taken right now to improve service. And this is Angelica's team, who have been your problem solvers, okay? I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but we have a great team. We may not have enough of them to do the troubleshooting that's been required. So ADP is going to be adding an email access, formal email access for United Church. Again, like you could talk about whether that could or should have been in place years ago, but we did buy the cheapest green screen solution originally, and now we're trying to get, even within a 10-year type, 10 years of being current. So there will be email access to ADP to, in my view, provide a better audit trail for what their service level is like, and ideally a better service. Another thing we're doing, you have authorized the national team, this is Hannah, Eileen, and Angelica's team, to troubleshoot for you, but they've been stuck so far. They can't look at your data without calling ADP and sitting in a phone queue too. So we're looking for a solution that we expect to have very shortly, where you've authorized it, we'll be able to skip the phone queue and have direct access to that data. We're also adding a member to the payroll team, the internal United Church payroll team, because the stress level, frankly, has been huge, and the team has been doing a great job, but it's not sustainable. Procedural changes. Now, if you're a new employer coming aboard, we're going to offer less flexibility on the dates, because a lot of that trouble that we had last fall, government announces a new holiday with that screwed up all kinds of payroll processors everywhere. But we're going to basically move away from offering biweekly pay. It's an internal business rule. It would help us, particularly with the linkages needed for the pension and benefit system, to do away with that, because so we would bump into fewer month-end crossover problems. So we're thinking 12 or 24 pays a year, either monthly or semi-monthly. And again, this is for new people first, and we'll be basically saying the way we do it is pay dates that don't cross over month-end, which is a problem. Now, I'll probably be coming back to many of you and asking, hey, would you consider making those kinds of changes to reduce error and risk? But that's a conversation for another day. What I want you to hear today is the number of actions that are being taken loud and clear of frustrations for everybody on the payroll side. And again, the team numbers are there. They're included. So if you go back or you need to do a lookup, folks are working hard to improve the situation. So is ADP, but the things that we control are the ones that I'm hammering away on while I express my dissatisfaction with ADP. So I'm moving into some general items here, and then we'll have one more question session. The governance extensions, people asked about it before, but they are right now extended to June 2022 in terms of budget approvals, financial statement approvals, and pastoral relations approvals. I laughed when I saw this extension. Now I'm hoping it wasn't conservative. I mean, this is what it is right now. The odds of it being moved up at this stage, I would put at 0, but who knows? Maybe things will turn out that great. A number of miscellaneous questions. These are the answers, okay? GST, HST rebates aren't revenue. Those of you who manage on a pure cash budget, think of it as revenue, but it's really an offset, a reduction of expense. And on the National Church website, we've had guidelines to show you how to potentially account for it to keep it cleaner. But that's just a question that I've had a few times leading up to this webinar. Here's one that's timely. M&S collected in 2021, but remitted in 2022 is a payable on your books at the local congregation. Some folks will sort of backdate it and pretend it, like say it went in, but if it hasn't been paid, if it is being paid in January, which is very common and which we organize around, it should be set up as a payable so that the congregation knows that this money was collected but not yet remitted. People were asking about investment policy and in particular asset mix. And what I say there is, before you go changing, however disappointed you are with your GIC rates, before you go changing that, you have to have the conversation locally about your risk tolerance. There's risk in anything, and particularly when you're moving from GICs, there's even timing risk. You could just catch a dip in the market where you're underwater right away, and everybody's blaming you, right? So it's got to be a very broad-based policy review that you should have, and the foundation has an excellent educational piece that I provide to people routinely, but you could Google it at the United Church Foundation. Each person, Clyde mentioned this earlier, each person on the My Business account needs to sign up first of all, or they can be added, I guess, and they need to be on the T1235 list. And finally, this is for my accounting department. If you're submitting money electronically, you have the what we used to call the M&S number, but we ask that you put either an M&S or a DA in front of it to tell us whether it's an assessment payment or mission and service. We are seeing a few more misallocations on that. Okay, am I going backwards? Okay, there, I think I'm better. Professional audit, that's another question that's come up a few times. The key point, I've said for years now, do the best you can, whether that's having a treasurer swap where you look at yours and I look at mine. It's tougher and tougher to get an audit, and Clyde just tonight gave me more information on this. And this is, so far it's Ontario, but if it's in Ontario, it's probably elsewhere too, where Clyde and I used to actually do reviews for people. We'd look at their books and stuff, and if we gave people a statement, I would say, hey, I'm not an accountant. Hey, I didn't look at everything, but I have looked at this, this, and this, and you offer some degree of comfort. Well, you can't do that anymore, and neither can Clyde. We're both out of business, and if you're offering any kind of audit review or notice to reader, you have to be a CPA, and if it's a volunteer, you can't even have notes in the financial statement, because those notes are going to be relied on. So again, that review might be someone in your own congregation who's not on the board looking things over, if that's all you can afford, or it might be a treasurer swap, but you've got to be careful to make sure that your congregation knows what you've got. My own congregation stepped away from an audit for a number of years, and we made sure that people knew that it wasn't audited, it was reviewed. But we've gone back to an audit, and I guess we're able to afford it. But for those of you who can't, the best review you can find and afford, and tell people what it is. Costs here, I'm not going to talk about them. I've listed these in past webinars. Your contacts here, the usual categories of activity that you can reach out to people, and this is intended to be a reference. Follow-up questions. I'm not putting Andy's email out there yet, but pretty soon he might be your guy. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again for all you do, and let's open it up to the last round of questions.
I'm not seeing a lot of questions, little bits and pieces here and there. So let me just acknowledge that Eric slammed through the last half a dozen slides really quickly. They are all at the United in Learning website, and I will go and get you the link for that right now and put it in the chat so that you can find it. Go to unitedinlearning.com, follow the links to recorded webinars, and you'll always find this stuff.
Okay.
All of the links that appeared in the slides are there on the landing page for tonight's program, and there's a PDF copy of the slides because we know that not everybody has PowerPoint. Oh, I'm tired just listening to you rush through it all. There's a lot to do.
Sorry, folks, but I want to watch an episode of Ozark.
There you go. Thank you, friends, for hanging in there. Thank you to Eric and Clyde and Andy and Angelica for your work on this. I'm going to take the leaders off into a private breakout room, as I always do. And we will look forward to seeing you again next month, the fourth Wednesday of February, for the next exciting update. Take care and all the best. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.